Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. Mike Brcic is here from Wayfinders.com. And Mike is all about connection and belonging, and he takes groups of entrepreneurs to some of the most remote and spectacular places on Earth. We're talking about Greenland, the Amazon jungle, Uganda, Mongolia, and so many more. And Mike is going to tell us about the power of the mastermind and the power of how travel expands your mind and how we can network and grow our business and all these other amazing things. So, Mike, glad to be speaking with you.
I'm super excited to be here. Yeah, good to be here.
And I'm glad to have you here. And so I've read up about you, how you kind of my understanding is you kind of have two sides of the coin, right? You're all about the operations and systematizing the business. And that way it runs and you can sell it or just let it, continue on its own. And you're also about taking these groups of entrepreneurs to some of the most remote places on earth for 7 or 8 days and having these amazing experiences. But that's just my knowledge about you. But what are you all about? What's the elevator pitch? What's your passion and focus?
Yeah, thank you. Really, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, like distilling down, like what is it, what is my focus, my professional focus, my life focus? It really comes down to connection and something I call alignment, so that, your work, your behaviors, your thoughts, it's all in line with who you are at your core. And at my events, we do a lot of work exploring this theme of authenticity. And I think we can all relate to where our life, times in our life where it just doesn't quite feel aligned with who we feel we are at our authentic core. And that's, lots of well-meaning people along the way told us who we should be and how we should behave and the careers we should follow and all that kind of stuff. And, over time that sediment builds up and we start to believe those stories. And then one day we wake up and it's just like, this life just doesn't feel like my own. Whose life am I living? And so that's a lot of the focus of my work. And underlying all that is that focus on connection. So, I have this 5 C's model that I work with in terms of my business. And what I'm trying to achieve is help people be more connected to themselves. That's C number one, connected to others through meaningful connections with others, connected to the natural world, because that's where we spring from, connected to a sense of work and calling. And then the final one is my shorthand. I call it connection to mystery, but it's a connection to something greater than ourselves. And that can take many different forms. But when we work to, and I come at it from the standpoint that most people have become very disconnected from all 5 of those things. And if we can start to restore those, um, just bit by bit, you feel a greater sense of harmony. You feel more authentic, like your life is more your own. You impact others more positively. And so that's really the heart of the work, even though it's wrapped in this container that looks like an adventure or travel experience. But that's really just the delivery vehicle.
Wonderful. And that's a good thing, right? To have it wrapped in the travel that way, it kind of tricks our brain into thinking we're having fun going off on an adventure, but we're really doing the important kind of self inner work. And there's all these kind of thoughts or people speak about this idea of like your core self or who you really are on the inside. And you mentioned out the sediment has kind of gathered up based on what just the world has beaten you down, or you listen to that or this person or ended up on a path. And so we need to kind of connect in all these different ways that you're mentioning. And I love the alignment idea because it always, for some reason, rubs me the wrong way when people talk about this thing like work-life balance, as if like if one goes up, one goes down, and I have to be like this way in my work or my business and this way in my personal life. And then it seems like these business owners or entrepreneurs that are really the happiest and most successful and make all this impact, they kind of have all these things about them personality wise that they're just always expressing, and they go on podcasts or do videos, and all like their personality and all the things that make them unique are not hidden. It's just kind of part of it. And so it's all wonderful to think about, but then we need to actually like get it done, right? And so how do we implement some of these crazy ideas, and like where do you think business owners and entrepreneurs are kind of missing the mark these days?
Yeah, great question. You touched on an important word, which is the expressing or the expression part, right? And so for me, my work is a perfect expression of who I am, my skills, my passions, my deepest desires, my experience, all of that. And I feel completely aligned with my work, and it feels like the work I'm meant to be doing on this earth. And it didn't come to me easily. I had a 20 23-year career in entrepreneurship before that, before I got into this business, or 21 maybe. There's a bit of an overlap between the two businesses. My previous business, it's not like I was completely misaligned with that. I started I ran a company that did high-end mountain bike trips all over the world. So it was also, adventure and travel. And that was it was a ton of fun. And I got to travel all over the world and ride my mountain bike. And it was for 15 of those 23 years that I ran that company, the best thing ever. And then I kind of, then I got a little bit off the rails. I started bringing on investors, taking on a lot of debt, expanding the team, just going crazy, we had this goal of being in 150 countries by 2021. This was a goal I set back in 2016. Long story short, we were well on our way to hit that target. We were expanding rapidly. And I just woke up one day and I just felt this is all wrong. I don't even know why I'm doing this. And, I started doing a little bit of soul searching there. And over the period, let's say a couple of months, like really digging into like, what am I doing with this business and why am I chasing these things? And really the answer that came back repeatedly was it was feeding my ego. And my ego wanted to be validated. I wanted the cover of Entrepreneur magazine, and I wanted the all the recognition that came with having lots of zeros on our revenue figures and, operating everywhere. And what I realized was that that is so hollow and meaningless, and that I was never going to get what I was actually looking for, which is just a sense of fulfillment and peace and comfort in my own skin. I was never going to get that by chasing those external goals. And ultimately, I ended up totally rejigging the business, but ultimately I ended up selling it because I realized that I'd outgrown that chapter of my life and I'd become a different person, and that was no longer meaningful to me. So in answer to your question, it really starts with understanding ourselves first on a deeper level, and who we are, what makes us tick. I'm right now I'm leading members of my community, the Wayfinders community. It's that time of year where people are thinking about goals and goal setting. And so we had a couple of calls where we talked about like, instead of just jumping straight to goals, what is the work that has to happen? And before that is a little bit of self-inquiry and like, who am I? What's important to me? And what are my guiding principles? And then once you have a clear grounding in that, then you can start to set some really meaningful goals so that when when this time comes around next year, whether you've hit that goal or not, the process of getting there just feels aligned with who you are. And also, it's happened to me so many times in the past where I set goals and then I hit them, and it's like, oh, now what? And it doesn't actually feel that meaningful. It's like maybe we pop some bubbly, celebrate for an afternoon, and then it's done. And it actually felt kind of hollow. And so having those goals, having those targets, having that process, that it's more about, who you become along the way, and does it feel in alignment with who you are? Then you can enjoy that whether you hit your targets or not. And I've coached hundreds of entrepreneurs, and I've seen so many of them, just set arbitrary goals like I want to 10x my revenue in 3 years. And when I dig into that and say, well, tell me about that. Why is that meaningful to you? That what comes up at the end of that is nothing too meaningful to them. It's just kind of an arbitrary thing that they got sucked into because everybody says you should do that, right? So I'm all about spending the time to like really get to know yourself and what makes you tick and what makes you light up and what pisses you off and all those things, and then build the business around that. And sometimes that means just leaving your business entirely, but usually what I found with most entrepreneurs is there was something, particularly like if I'm coaching somebody who's 15 years into it and they're feeling really burnt out. Sometimes the answer is like, you got to get out. Either you sell it or you just abandon it because it's ripping you in two. But more often than not, it's like, hey, let's go back to the beginning. When you started this business, tell me about like what lit you up back then. Why did you get into this? And then we can start to reorient around that, and we can start to strip away all the other stuff, right? Delegating all the stuff that drains your energy and focusing on what gives you joy. And that's you talked about operations and systems. All of my operations knowledge and wisdom and all of my systems and processes, they're all in service of one thing, so that I can do the things that light me up and create a huge amount of value for my customers, for the business. And then the rest of the stuff gets pushed out to, my staff, freelancers. I automate it, whatever, right? So I want to do the stuff that lights me right up.
I love that phrase you put out there, is what lights you up. And so it seems like what you're saying is that people maybe set these arbitrary goals, and then with the danger with just making them up is then either you hit them or you don't hit them. And if you hit them, then it's like an empty, hollow victory. There's no fulfillment there. And you're saying that instead of just setting these goals because you fell into them or it sounds good or someone else told you to do this, you kind of take all these steps back and you take this inventory and you figure out what makes you angry, what makes you happy, what gets you excited, and then kind of rebuild the goals. And then that might mean that the business might need to be fixed or have a new business, but it seems to tie back to what made you excited in the first place. And when you're mentioning that, it reminds me of like that classic advice of if you're in a relationship or a marriage, and it maybe if it's not going so well, you think back to the beginning part, right? And what made you excited in the first place, and how did you act in the when that first started? And that way, when you apply it to your relationship with your business, then it's something where you kind of have the past and the future, and it's not just something where you're kind of drifting along. And so, as far as like the mastermind part of it, like there's always like the magic, right? Where if you don't have a coach, you don't have a group like this, it's like hard to explain just the magic of getting in a room with everyone who's just as excited as you and like setting these goals and talking about the future. So can you kind of tell us like with all these masterminds you run and all these companies you help, like tell us about the magic and the excitement and just the coming alive when these groups get together?
Yeah. I mean, I've been blessed to be a part of lots of different, quote unquote, mastermind groups. And really, that term gets tossed around a lot and maybe used a little bit too much. And it's like, oh, I met a friend for lunch. It was a mastermind, right? Like we're talking about a group of people, usually several people that come together for a common purpose, which is to support each other, but also hold each other accountable, to examine our problems and come up with solutions together. So I was in EO Entrepreneurs Organization. I had a forum there. I left that and I started my own forum with six other guys. I'm currently in another group with called Front Row Dads, which is amazing, with a group of six other dads. And really, it's just the biggest value is in having other people look at the same problem from different perspectives, because it's very easy when you're looking at a problem to get fixed into one perspective, into one story about what the actual problem is. And in the groups that I've been part of, we've moved away from we some of the groups I started with, they start with advice. You share a problem and then the other people give you advice. And I learned very early on that that's not really that helpful, because another person's experience isn't necessarily relevant, and they don't know, unless I spend days and weeks explaining the problem to them, they don't have all of the context to be able to give proper advice. And then the third thing is advice can often be very judgmental, like, why didn't you think of this or whatever, and it doesn't land right. So we move from that towards experience sharing. So no direct advice, just sharing your experience, and that's kind of a level better. But what I discovered is that a deeper level than that is simply a group of people asking you questions that are going to take you deeper and are going to help you unlock your own wisdom. And they're going to help you see that problem from different angles that you might not have considered. I've, in my events with Wayfinders, I've led people through this process that was developed by the Quakers. And I'm trying to remember the name of it. Why is it escaping me? Yeah, it'll come to me. But really, it's a process of somebody poses a problem, an issue, a challenge that they're facing, usually something that they're like really stuck on, haven't been able to get past. And then the other group, the remainder of the group then takes turns asking what are called open and honest questions. And really that involves like deep listening to the person who's presenting, taking your time, and then asking thoughtful questions that are going to hopefully get that person to go a level deeper and look at it other ways. And I found that process to be really powerful, because it starts with the premise that we have our own wisdom inside us, but sometimes we're just blocked off from it. And if you ask the right questions, it removes those barriers and helps us to access it. And that's been the biggest value to me as far as any mastermind that I've been of. It's just all those different perspectives that help me unlock my own wisdom.
I love that idea, unlocking the wisdom that you have inside of you, but you just can't access it. And I imagine that, I mean, there's all these things that you mentioned, like there's kind of just the idea of even explaining your problem and putting it into words and explaining it to someone that you don't see maybe every day. So that way you have to kind of put it in real basic terms. And then also you're saying that these other people kind of hit you from different angles, and maybe they give maybe misinformed or bad advice, but then that might lead to something else, or other people have different kind of suggestions you can kind of pick through and be like, oh, well, suggestions 1 through 4 maybe weren't good, but 5 and 6 maybe led me to number 7, and then I can kind of get to the answer that way. And so that's cool to think about as far as solving our problems and getting outside of our box and just kind of seeing things from this different angle. And along those lines, do you have any fun stories to share about these experiences or these masterminds? And you can feel free to talk about either like solving a business problem or about a travel adventure, but just what do you have as far as just a story to help us see this different way of thinking?
Hmm. Well, I'll tell you sort of a meta story that applies to a number of my events. And so, the heart of what I do, there's all kinds of smaller events that I do, and there's coaching and whatnot. But the heart of it is these longer, like 9, 10 day international adventures, and I take people to really remote and wild places. So, just a month and a half ago, I was in Western Mongolia leading a group of 27 people through this incredible landscape there. And one of the things that I've started regularly incorporating into my events is, I call it like a wilderness vision quest, so to speak. And that term, goes back thousands of years, very lots of different ancient traditions. The idea of just taking people out into the wilderness and putting them somewhere by themselves so they can just be in complete stillness and complete silence. And just hopefully, if you get, my experience has been that if you get quiet enough and you get still enough, your subconscious starts to talk to you, your soul starts to talk to you, if we want to use more ethereal words, and you start to access that deeper wisdom. And and I've also had people, and it's fairly simple. I just take people, we did it in Mongolia, and we just did it near our final camp, and I took people into the mountains there and just sort of dropped them off at various places and told them to go find a spot not so far away that they can't hear, the toll of the bell when it's time. And I dropped them there for 3 hours, and I said, don't do anything, just sit there and see what comes up. There's no objective. So, they were told to leave their phones and their journals and everything behind and just sit there. And the experience people have with this exercise runs the gamut from, that was nice, it was very relaxing, to sometimes it's like, oh, it's kind of freaky, like I'm never alone with my thoughts. But sometimes it ranges all the way to the mystical, where people have these experiences that are deeply, deeply profound. There was this woman who, when we were in Uganda, we went into the jungle, and everybody had their own kind of patch of jungle, and she had this deeply mystical experience with where the jungle spoke to her. And it's her story to share. I won't go too deeply into it, but it was profoundly moving, and it's now a year and a half later still impacts her, and it's kind of something she returns to time and time again. And you don't need to go all the way to Mongolia or Uganda to do this, but if you most of us, entrepreneurs, they tend to be pretty hard charging bunch, right? And it's go, 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 hustle, hustle, grind. And I'm fond of that saying, if you're going to climb the ladder of success, make sure it's leaning on the right building. And unless we take the time to get quiet and get still and listen to ourselves, it's very easy to lean that ladder on the wrong building. And so the best way I know to do that is just go spend time in nature. And you can do it in your living room, but I just find it works better when we're surrounded by nature and quiet and stillness and stuff like that. And it could be as little as an hour, and you'll be amazed at, what comes up, especially if you make that a regular practice, right? Go once a month or once a week or whatever it is. But if you can go to one of the most remote places on earth, like Western Mongolia, it's even better.
I love it. So it's something that we can do anywhere, but even better if you go to those remote places. And that's an important reminder that I find myself, I fall out of that sometimes. Maybe the past, maybe year or so, up until maybe like the last 3 months, I fell out of this kind of self-care, quietness, stillness, meditative mindfulness idea. And I've made it a point now, just to get back on track, to maybe 4 or 5 times a day just to go out for a walk and leave my phone. And I'm not even going that far away from my house, but just kind of, just being alone with my thoughts, not really having a goal, but just having the quietness, not having all the notifications and the dings and the sounds, just kind of being out there. And it's really helped my mental health, even though it seems counterintuitive, right? Because you think like, oh, I'm wasting 20 minutes or wasting an hour taking this long walk, but it helps so much. And I even had just enough time before this podcast we're doing to take a walk. And I think it helped me so much just to get my focus and my energy back. And I think that's a really important reminder, just to seek that quietness, seek that space, so that way we're not just going from one thing to the next. And you hear about people doing things like scheduling creative time or scheduling nothing time, just to make sure that they give their brain that way to recharge. And just the way you describe it is just kind of having the mini vacation. And we've all had those experiences where we went to summer camp or had that week of spring break that felt like entire years, right? Where it was, the whole environment was different and it was so transformative, and we had just these new ideas. And I think that's a really powerful thing for us to be seeking and to be doing, to change the channel and maybe not be jumping into this for a goal, but knowing that what eventually comes out of it, maybe not at first, but just from this repeat practice, is by, as you're saying, knowing if your ladder is leaning on the wrong building, and knowing if this goal you're pursuing, if you say, I want to be in 150 countries, for all you know, that is what you should be doing. And for all you know, when you get there, you are on top of the world and you are happy. And so it's not just a matter of throwing out what's working, but just knowing if you're on the right path. And it's a difficult question to answer, right? And only we can answer that. And so we just kind of need to be taking these breaks and changing our environment in order to get there. So how do you relate to this fun idea? If someone says, man, a lot of what Mike says, I want to pursue it. I want to join some kind of mastermind and go on some kind of trips. Like, what's the website? What's the offer? How can they take the next step with you?
Yeah. I want to just touch on your point about, incorporating those walks and that meditation, stuff like that. There, for me, there's two primary benefits from a regular practice like that. And I meditate every morning. One is it just lowers my overall anxiety. I'm just calmer. My nervous system is more relaxed. But secondly, it comes back to that alignment piece that we're talking about. And, my actions and my goals and, all the things that I'm striving for just become more aligned. And it doesn't take much to become a little bit misaligned. And the analogy I would use, like if you're sailing from London to New York and you're 3 degrees off course, you're probably going to be ending up somewhere like in South Carolina or something like that, pretty far from New York, right? And so that practice of stillness, whether it's meditation or going for a walk or whatever, there's so much value in it, just, for your nervous system, for your alignment, making sure that, the things you're striving for are aligned. As for your question, yeah, the website is, you touched on it at the beginning, way-finders.com, way-finders.com. My 2024 adventures, I'm going to Ecuador in late February. We're going to be trying to summit 20,000-foot volcano there. And then in October, we're going to Laos in Southeast Asia. Both of those are sold out at the moment. My events tend to sell out really far in advance. But in 2025, going back to Mongolia, super excited about that. And also, we have a community membership model where you can, without going halfway around the world or whatever, you can join the community and you can access, an amazing community of entrepreneurs. And we have tons of online and in-person events and all kinds of stuff. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Fantastic. Well, exciting times ahead for you. And that is way-finders.com, correct?
That's correct. That hyphen would have cost me $25,000 to rectify, and whoever has wayfinders.com seems to be firm on that ridiculous price, and I don't really care that much about it. So way-finders.com.
Right, and you sell at your events anyway, so who cares about them, right? What's more important is you. And as we're winding down our conversation here, Mike, like, just as far as this whole mastermind concept, like, I have such a love-hate relationship, and maybe this is too big of a question to answer in these last couple of minutes, but like, I've over my years, I've like joined some masterminds and they kind of like went bad, or I stopped getting things out of that, and I ended up like going without one and joining one. I kind of sometimes doubt myself because I kind of sometimes join one for like a few months or a few years, and then I feel like I squeezed everything out of it, or I'm just kind of not getting results and I quit. So Do you experience something similar, or do you have words of encouragement for someone like me who sometimes goes years without a mastermind, and I feel like I'm like a fraud, like I'm not applying the think and grow richness of it all?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is ask you, is this a pattern? Does this show up in other areas of your life? Um, if you're joining things and then ducking up, and I say that with zero judgment, because that's been my modus operandus as well, where consistency has been like a real sort of growth edge for me, and being able to commit to things long term. Um, and so some of that might be like what's going on for you internally, because that was my story, right? And I had a hard time committing to things. The other is just, you haven't found the right fit, and you just got to shop around. But I find with any group I'm a part of, I'm going to get out of it what I put into it. And so I've realized that if I'm gonna join something, like Front Row Dads, for instance, fantastic group. I love it. I realized at the beginning I was kind of half-assing it, and and I said to myself, if I'm gonna actually, be part of this thing, and I'm gonna pay to be part of it and commit to it, then I need to commit to it. And so, then it became a different conversation of like, what do I need to do to step up, and how can I contribute value to it? Because the more I contribute, the more value I'll get back. And so that's been a learning opportunity for me as well. And I think, um, in any group that you join, it's like just commit to it. Whether it's 6 months or 1 year, just commit as hard as you can to it, and then see what comes back. And if after that time you don't feel like you're getting the value from it, then find something that will bring you value, but give it your heart and soul.
Logical advice. Have a plan, know what that milestone is, and say, okay, I'll reevaluate in 6 months after giving it my all, and then I can decide to stay with it or not stay with it. And it seems like it just goes back to that relationship idea, right? There's the relationship with nature, and there's a relationship with yourself, and relationship with your group, and you get out of it what you get into it, right? You feed your body bad stuff and bad food, and you don't meditate, and you wonder why you're grumpy and unhappy and anxious. Well, you get out of it what you get into it. And so thank you for that. And I will input it into the subconscious brain, because some questions we just need to think about over and over for many lengths of time. And sometimes, it just takes a while to get to the solution. But as far as you out there in podcast land, if this seems like something that you can and should do to get clarity and to evolve your business and get the support and accountability and so on, then go to way-finders.com. And just to make sure that we have the call to action correct, Mike, is that the only place to go, or do you have other links to drop here?
Right now it is. I have a Substack channel that I was writing on regularly, but I took a bit of a break to focus on other things. I'll come back to that at some point. But for now, if you just go to way-finders.com, that'll get you into some good stuff.
Fantastic. Well, way-finders.com. And we've been speaking with Mike Brcic. And to spell that out, since it may be audio in the podcast, that last name is Brcic. That's the most incredible name I've ever come across in my entire life. So Mike Brcic from Wayfinders, which is an amazing mastermind that you should join and look into. And thank you very much, Mike, for showing up and stopping by and just dazzling us with some of these deep, thoughtful, insightful questions. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Thank you, Robert, and have a great day.